Hello everybody, this is Force-E Live, and we're out here in Dr. Larry Wood's backyard, and it's a beautiful day actually. We will show you a little bit what's going on in his backyard here real soon, but first of all, I just wanted to say thank you, Larry, for agreeing to come on and do our first ever Facebook Live with Force-E.
Thank you.
And we're really excited because you know, it's an opportunity to reach people that are not just here in South Florida that come to the presentations at the store, but it's a way to reach audiences that live in other states. So hopefully when you guys are logged on, you can let us know what state you're at or what city you're in here in Florida, and we can say hello. I think we have our first one. We've got Celeste. Hey, Celeste. Hi. All right, our first person's on our watch. Awesome. So if you guys, obviously you know what's going on in the world, and so we can't have too many fun Force-E events right now. We were supposed to have our Bowling for Turtles. It's like our annual bowling tournament fundraiser for the Florida Hawksbill Project, and unfortunately, because it's a big social gathering, we had to stop and reschedule. We're not really sure when we're going to be able to give you a date, but stay tuned. We'll make sure to get that out to you in social media and in emails. You can always go onto the Force-E website, go to our event tab, and we'll let you know when we have a date for that event, and we'll obviously have fun. And I don't know, I mean, I'm not a very good bowler, are you?
No, not great. Not great, but it's fun anyway.
It is fun. I think you and I just kind of walk around and hang out.
Yeah,
but
avoid the embarrassment.
But everybody gets into it, and there's trophies to be won, and maybe somebody can take Gary and take him off the board for bowling, and maybe somebody else can win this year. Oh, we got Scuba David! Yay! The Beast, the Blue Heron Bridge photographer. All right, guys, so like I said, I'm here with Dr. Larry Wood, and he's not just a colleague, but he's a dear friend of mine for years. I don't know, 7, 8 years?
Easily, yeah, probably maybe 10.
Yeah, we've actually been going out and diving together for this particular project, and I actually have a tattoo on my foot. Yes, everybody, I do. Let's see if I can show you all. The tattoo on my foot is the mermaid with the sea turtle. All right, and I got that because I did so much work with Larry and the Hawksbill Turtles that I wanted to make sure it was a memory for me. So, all right, so we've got Larry Wood here, and he is with the Florida Hawksbill Turtles, and I'm going to go ahead and let him talk to you about his project.
Well, we're going to try to see if this is going to work. Some of you may have seen my slideshow before. It may not be all that visible in here, but it kind of keeps me on track, I guess. But yeah, Nicole wanted me to give a little overview of my project and what's up with the Hawksbill Turtles. And of course, if there are questions from anybody out there on the other sea turtle species or what's going on in the beaches, I can do what I can to answer for you. But very briefly, I got into hawksbills as a diver. I used to work on the beaches, counting the nests in Juno Beach and Jupiter, and on occasion I would get out scuba diving, and we would, of course, like you all know, see lots of loggerheads out there certain times a year. But we noticed also that there were hawksbill turtles that seemed to be inhabitants of our reefs pretty much all year round. And so I kind of became interested in what Florida means to hawksbills, because we can get to in a little bit, they're not one that likes to use Florida's beaches for nesting. So the work that we've been doing in Florida has been focused on the loggerheads and the greens and the leatherbacks, because they're the ones that come to Florida in those big numbers for nesting. But I was curious as to what these hawksbills are doing here, because we don't see them nesting on the beach. So they must be here for a different reason. And that's kind of how I started my project. So very briefly, I work with the, it's not going to be able to see this very well, but anyway, I work with the foundation based in Lauderdale. It's called the National Save the Sea Turtle Foundation. And they've been around for about 30 years now, and they support my project and other projects around the state and around the region. So yeah, these are a group of businessmen who many years ago realized that they might be able to help out in recovering some of our sea turtle populations in our coastal environment. And I've known the gang now for probably about 20 years with the foundation, and they've always been very kind to support my work. And so nowadays I'm working a little bit more closely with them, and so I always like to start by saying thank you, especially to the foundation, for allowing all this to happen, you know. So the hawksbills are a pretty unique species. They are a little smaller than some of the other species you might be accustomed to. Hawksbill turtles end up right around maybe 200 pounds or so as big ones. They get their name from that shape of their face. They kind of have an eagle or hawk-like appearance, kind of that beak, the kind of overbite with the beak. That's believed to be an adaptation primarily for getting their favorite foods, which are sea sponges. And I always like to add that there's a lot of different kinds of sea sponges, and some of them are a little bit easier to see and detect than others, and part of our work has shown that they're very picky about the sea sponges they eat, and they prefer those that are found in little nooks, crannies, cracks in the reef and between rocks, up underneath ledges. So that's kind of what that beak is specialized for. It's kind of getting into those little spots where those really unique and nutritious sponges that they happen to prefer actually live. So you don't really see them too often just cruising along a reef and munching on barrel sponges. It seems like that would be easier for them, but that's it seems not to be their particular behavior. But anyway, they also have a beautiful shell, and you can't go talk about hawksbills without mentioning the value of their shell to human beings over the last few thousand years. It's kind of a bummer for them, and the primary reason that we consider them to be a critically endangered species is to do with the value of their shell, which was used for all different kinds of artwork and craft work, anything from personal effects like combs to jewelry to inlays for various cabinetry and other woodworks. So kind of a very valuable product for many thousands of years. So people would harvest them intensely whenever they were found, and didn't leave too many left. So here we are, all of us that work with this species all around the world are hoping that we can stabilize and recover some of these populations. I was interested, as I mentioned, as a diver in the hawksbills. I did a little research when I started my project, and I found that even though no one else had really done research specifically with the hawksbills here, there was another person who had a great interest in them for many years, and she's now the late, now passed, but the late Noreen Rouse was a diver in Palm Beach for many years, and she became familiar with the residential hawksbills and other species, but nonetheless, especially hawksbills that she would find here in Palm Beach. So I kind of got this great record from her dive logs. She was very careful in writing down all the things she encountered over the years. So we learned that there's really kind of a history of hawksbills living here in Florida, in particular in the Palm Beach reefs. And we got an idea of their size and their growth rates. She was kind of a pioneer in her day and was collecting information that nobody else was. So then I came along and started to do a little bit more structured type of survey where we were actually tagging them and marking them and measuring them more carefully and everything. So I kind of got this idea, let's start a hawksbill project. And so here it is 15 years later, and keeps going on, huh? Pretty amazing. Didn't know that was going to happen. My project involves pretty much all the different aspects of biology that you can think of. It was really lucky for me as I found this population that had not been studied before, so I was able to do a variety of different things to look at their abundance and their distribution, their movements, their gender, sort of like, you know, the genetic history, what do you call it, haplotypes nowadays, we call them like your DNA fingerprinting, you know, like people do with 23andMe and all that. I wanted to find out where these turtles were coming from. So we had a great opportunity to apply all different principles of biology here to this project. So not only is it a neat species, but it's a neat aggregation to work on because we learn something almost every time we do a new experiment. Florida is a great place for sea turtles. The reason we have hawksbills in particular is because we have reefs, and the reason we have reefs is because we happen to have the Gulf Stream right offshore that flows up from the Caribbean and brings us that nice, warm, clear water that is obviously what coral reefs require. So without that Gulf Streams flowing on by, we may not have the habitat that hawksbills prefer. And so that's really the root of it. Why we have hawksbills here is because of that Gulf Stream that cruises on by. But if you're into sea turtles anyway, great place. 5 species, on occasion even a 6th species. The olive ridleys occasionally come by. We have 3 different nesters here. So if you're into sea turtle biology, Florida is a real busy and active place with lots of species and lots of life stages to study. So good place to work with sea turtles. The reef itself is, many of you may know this already, but it's, Florida has been around a while, but not forever, right? And so Florida has seen a lot of changes along the coastline over the long, geologic time. So we've seen ice ages come and go, and Florida has widened, and Florida has thinned again based on the water level, how high the sea is. So we've got old reefs that grew a long time ago, and the only current reefs that are really what we call accreting or developing reefs we find down in the Keys. Up here in Palm Beach, we see some of the old relict reefs from a few thousand years ago that are now host to all those coral sponges and algae and things that you see now. The reefs that we have in Palm Beach County aren't accreting and growing hermit-typic reefs that you might find on the Great Barrier Reef. You have to go down to the Keys to get those. But nonetheless, it all is kind of one continuous reef system that kind of goes all the way from the dry Tortugas west of Key West all the way up through northern Palm Beach County. So that's currently what the study site is. So when people ask where do I go to look for the hawksbills, anywhere between Jupiter and Key West out to even the Marquesas and dry Tortugas. We basically, the way we get them, fairly straightforward. We take dive boats, oftentimes with Force-E or whomever else. They're very kind to take us out. We get our gear on, take a drift dive, see if we find a turtle. Hopefully if we do, then I'm able to grasp them carefully underwater. We're kind of lucky that hawksbills are comparatively, complacent or pretty friendly. I guess another word, they seem to not be as afraid of divers as some of the other species. And a lot of people know that, especially photographers. You get great pictures of hawksbills because they let you get right up there and take a close-up. So anyway, I found that I was able to capture them, and once I get them on the boat, it's our opportunity to do as many different samples, procedures, tags as we can. So we make sure that there are tags on them. That's for future reference. You got to know which one is which. So they get flipper tags on the trailing edge of each of their front flippers. So if you are divers around here and you happen to come across a hawksbill that has some shiny things on its flippers, you'll notice that there are going to be 3 letters and 3 numbers that follow those letters. If you can write them on your slate or remember them, you can always text or email and let me know which turtle you saw, and I can give you an idea of where I found it originally, how long it may have been there, and so on. So yeah, great idea on that.
And so it's kind of funny because when I go out and I see the tagged turtles, I'm always like, oh no, I don't have anything to write on. So if you're a photographer or you have your GoPro, just flash the numbers into your screen. So like if I see that it's YYJ and then it's 221, then that's what I do into the camera. So that way I know to write it down and send it to Larry to let him look it up.
Yep. And it's very helpful to me because I, as much as I would like to be, can't be out there all the time. So everyone else's eyes are really useful to me because we found turtles that have been sighted now for well over 10 years right here in the same places. So it's really cool when we get the same individual that gets seen repeatedly by divers, usually in somewhere near kind of the same place. So we get an idea of how long they're sticking around. So it's pretty cool. And then we also put like the old microchip, you call them, or the pit tag is a more fancy term for it. Same thing we use for dogs and cats. So that's going to be an internal tag that will remain there for the long term. And let's see, what else do we have? Let's see, next, oh yeah, we sampled their tissues. I used blood for a variety of different projects. Blood can be very helpful for determining their health status, like kind of for us. It can help determine their gender. If we can't tell from the outside, sometimes it's hard. We can learn about any contaminants that they may have been exposed to. And also we can learn about where they may have been and what they've been eating by analyzing some of the chemical signatures of carbon and nitrogen that they store in their tissues after they eat it, just like we all do. So it's kind of like you are what you eat kind of thing. So we can get a lot of good information out of taking our tissue and blood samples while we have the turtle aboard. And of course, we always get some photographs, and there's some neat things that live on their shells. So we got the barnacles and algae. We even found coral, right? We have fire coral that grows on the backs of their shells. So, you never know what you're going to find. And so we're always excited to see what's going on with each one of these things once we get them aboard.
And Larry, one time I remember as we were getting this turtle off the boat, he decided to take a poop. on the boat. And so actually that was a very useful tool because he took the sample and he was able to do some analyzation with that. So turtle poop is actually sometimes a good indication of the turtle's health.
Yeah, that was a thrill, let me tell you. And no, it's funny about that because just like as you can imagine from the science standpoint, there's a lot of information in there about parasites, a lot about health, a lot about what they've been eating. So a little bit, distasteful or gross, whatever, but you do get a lot of information out of that. So every now and then we get that gold, right?
I guess.
Yeah, you never know. Yeah, so anyway, and also remember what I was saying before, when people see the same turtle. Remember I was mentioning that sometimes people will write me an email or something and they say they've seen a turtle with a number, and we've seen it for many years in the same place. Well, I became very curious as to maybe, well, how big is the territory that they stick around in, you know? And so we were able to use satellite tracking devices. And as you can see the picture, it's kind of hard too, but we glue that thing on the back of the turtle there. And it's basically like having a cell phone on the back, and it will provide us information on the depth and the temperature of the turtle at any given time. And whenever it comes up to the surface, it'll take a GPS position for us. So over the long term, we get an idea of where the turtle's been going. All right, so what did we find? We found kind of the biggest surprise from my end was the abundance. We got more than we thought. I was thinking I'd probably find like 20 or so, maybe 30 of them, who knew? But I didn't think we'd be finding now close to 300, So we're a lot more hawksbills around than we thought. And they do seem to use the variety of habitats that we have. So if you guys are divers, you know what I'm talking about. If you go along the breakers, you're going to have the sand, you're going to have the ledge, you're going to have the top of the reef, you're going to have the backside of the reef. So we're finding that they'll, at one time or another during the day, use most of the various parts of the reef. So they're not stuck to one particular part of the habitat, but they do seem to stay very close in proximity to the reef structure itself. Part of the reason we don't have any nesting on Florida's beaches from the hawksbills is that the ones that are visiting us are too young. They're like the teenager age. So sea turtles...
Are they here for spring break?
Yeah, well, yes, as it turns out, they're getting in trouble, I'm sure.
Probably.
Yes, I hear the safest place to be is under the ocean, isn't that right?
That's
so
right.
I think we need to be diving. But anyhow, yeah, I don't want to, it gets a little confusing, but sea turtles do different, in the different stages of their lives, they may live in completely different places now.
There it is.
Hey, are we back?
Yeah, sorry guys.
We're back.
Little Wi-Fi problem.
Yeah, so anyway, the idea is that hawksbills are coming and using Florida's reefs as youngsters. They're not coming here as adults. So the ones we're finding in our study are primarily younger than adult-sized turtles. These are teenagers. So when they reach maturity, they're going to return to wherever it was they originally came from to reproduce themselves, and they stay there. We do not have adults that hang out in Florida. Only now and then do we see one kind of wandering on through. The vast majority are young ones. They're teenagers. So if you do a little math and you look at the size of the turtles that we have and how frequently we see them and how quickly they grow, it's likely that any given turtle that maybe living on Breakers Reef or maybe in Juneau or something is probably going to stay there for about 15 to 20 years or so before it gets big enough and old enough to move on to the next stage of its life. So hopefully that's not too confusing. It does get a little weird sometimes when trying to figure out when sea turtles do what, but they have a complicated life cycle, to be honest with you. So it's been difficult for us to learn this, and now that we're getting a handle of it, sometimes it can be difficult to explain.
We actually have a question from Roman. Hi, Roman. He wants to know, what's the biggest hawksbill that we've found in Florida waters?
Oh, we do see adults. So let's just to give you a proportion. Out of the 246 individuals that I've personally been able to identify and put tags on, only about maybe a dozen of them have been of adult size. And so we look at the size of their shell and we can determine that that would be a size at which they would be old enough or eligible to reproduce. So we've gotten about a dozen of those out of 203 50 almost. So it's in the minority. But those are, if you want poundage, you're talking maybe 150 pounds, 80 centimeters, a couple feet long, that kind of thing, if that's helpful. But
man, if we had to bring one up that big onto the boat,
I got one last week off of Jupiter. So yeah, it was,
how many crew members took to get that thing on the boat?
Yes, not easy. So we prefer the little ones are great, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're so easy. Yeah, good question though. But yeah, a big hawksbill. I mean, like the shaquille of hawksbills anywhere is 200 pounds. Usually they end up at about 150 or so pounds as a species. Here we are. Where do they come from? The very common question, right? Well, we wanted to do their genetics, and we wanted to know where they may have originated, and it looks like our Florida hawksbills are mostly coming from the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. There are a number of hawksbill rookeries that kind of surround the peninsula there. It's a big producer. And it makes a little sense because many of those hatchlings would find their way into the Gulf of Mexico. And then when they leave the Gulf of Mexico, they come through the Straits of Florida and end up kind of following the currents right into the Keys. So some of those may be going south to the Caribbean and others may be staying a little to the north, and that presents them right here to South Florida. So it makes a little sense, but that's mostly where the hawksbills of Florida are coming from. But they also have representatives from other parts of the Caribbean as well. So kind of cool to know. They don't go far, as it turns out. Our satellite trackers told us that they maintain a fairly small home range. When I say fairly small, not more than about a couple of kilometers, or I guess another way of putting it is like a mile of reef. So imagine if you just went out and plunked yourself down and did a nice reef dive on a pretty currenty day. You end up doing a 3/4 of a mile or a mile or so. Yeah. That's about the size of your typical hawksbill turtle territory. And then the other cool thing, and it's going to be hard to see in these charts, I'm not going to get into it with the charts, but the idea here is that not only do they have kind of a cool little neighborhood that they stay in, but they also have a preferred spot that they go to each night. So it's kind of like their sheltering spot. So it could be a cave, it could be a shipwreck, it could be a ledge of some kind. And so we found that each one of the turtles that carried the transmitters, they would return each evening to the very same spot, like really every night, to rest for the night. So their daily routine surrounds that particular, it's kind of like us, I guess, wherever you live, right? Your daily routine usually has something to do with surrounding your particular home, which you're going to return to most every night. So, yeah, not unusual, but anyway, that seems to be how they do it. So it's cool.
Actually kind of an interesting thing too, because if you see a hawksbill turtle that isn't tagged, all right, we want to know that as well. So you got to shoot us a message, because we're always looking to tag new turtles, especially in some of the areas that we haven't been able to dive as much in. We've done a lot up in the Palm Beach and Jupiter area. We'd love to do more in the Boynton, the Del Rey, the Pompano, Boca area. So, and it's harder to find turtles in that area. So if you do see one, that's especially not tagged, if you can give us those GPS coordinates, it's pretty sure that we might be able to find that turtle on the dive, because it's going to stay within that 1 to 2 mile radius.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's just a neat thing. It's a neat thing about their behavior, you know. Stick with what you got, right? So anyway, kind of to summarize things, we found some pretty cool stuff. What do we got? I've forgotten what I got here. The impact. What is it that we're doing? That makes sense. So, you know, we got a little bit of a regional impact here, because we are only Florida is just a little piece of the larger hawksbill, I guess you call it range or demographics, whatever, around the Caribbean. And so as different researchers are trying to recover the species in the various parts around the Caribbean, we're up here doing what we can in that sort of northwest part of that range. So we know that Florida isn't the busiest place in the world for hawksbills. We know that it's kind of in the periphery of their overall range. But at the same time, it's a great place for them because they get protection. In many other parts of the Caribbean, they're still kind of open game for poachers and others that are going to use them for their shells and meat and all that. So we know that if they do arrive here in Florida, we can protect them, and hopefully that enhances those populations. Because, you know, getting through that whole teenage years all the way to 25, 30 years old before they're even old enough to reproduce, we got to keep them safe for those periods of years so they can then add to the population themselves. We also have a kind of a local impact. We all know how sea turtles change people's behavior. You know, we have changed a lot of the rules related to the beaches and lights and all that because people respond positively to protecting sea turtles. They're kind of one of those critters that people like very much and they want to protect. And same thing with the reefs. If we can show that these turtles are so closely associated with the reefs, they really need them. We hope to attract a little bit more attention to those habitats which most people never encounter. You know, the divers are out there, we know what it's like, but you know, everybody goes to the beach, they don't see it from the beach. And if you're not there, it's kind of hard to connect with it. But sea turtles might be one of those connections, you know, that we can make with people. You know, conservation impact, like I mentioned, is like if people get into sea turtles, they can get into the reefs. And so what's next on the agenda? We'd like to know about tracing their movements specifically, so we're going to be looking at those traces of carbon and nitrogen and stuff to see if we can't trace their movements out of the Gulf of Mexico to kind of prove our hypothesis that that's the movement patterns that they're taking. We're going to be looking at their health. You know, when you go off to the doctor and they take a blood test and they come back with a whole paper and has all these panels and numbers on it and everything, well, it's very helpful to assess the overall physiological condition of a person, a dog, or whatever. So wouldn't you know that there's very few references out there for hawksbill turtles. It's tough for a veterinarian at perhaps a rehab facility or a researcher looking at physiology to understand what might be a normal range for everything from enzymes to glucose to all the different parameters we see in our blood. So we're doing a real thorough job to take blood samples to get a nice reference so that people have something to look at. Yeah.
Can I ask?
Sure.
Did you guys want to know how many females versus males are here in Florida?
Oh, that's a good question. I forgot to mention that. I won't wait for the question, but anyway, we did a gender thing with the blood, and we found that there's about twice as many females as there are to males, which is kind of normal. So it's about 2.5 females per male. Again, ours are juvenile, so they're not interested in reproducing as of yet, but nonetheless, this young aggregation is biased a little bit to the females, which isn't unusual, typical for sea turtles.
And the reason why I had him answer that question is because there's so little, you actually cannot tell the sex of the juvenile hawksbill turtle, because you'd have to take a blood sample. When they get older, yeah, you can tell by like the tail size and just the size alone, but when they're juveniles, you can't tell the difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, since these are young, it's kind of hard to tell whether they're from the outside, from boys, from girls. And so then we're also interested in behavior, so we're going to be working on some little cameras we're going to put on their backs in hopes of seeing them interact with each other, because we know that they prefer those favorite spots to sleep at night. So we're wondering how they communicate that with each other. How do they kind of figure out who gets to sleep where, kind of thing. So we're interested in looking at that. And so without all of my helpers, none of this ever would have happened, including Force-E and Nicole. I've had many people over the years and scientific advisors and funders and all that. Research like this, especially in the long term, takes a lot of help and a lot of funding, and I could not thank everybody enough for all that to keep this going. And thank you, Nicole. It's been so great. And so I'm happy to answer questions, whatever you got out there.
Yeah, we've got some people following us. If you have any questions, type it in. We'll read them out and we'll answer them. I just wanted to share some of my experiences with the project. I think it's always fun because before we ever go, when Larry and I jump in the water, we never know what we're going to get. The boat crew is usually like, oh yeah, we've seen a couple on this reef, so we're excited, and we get down there, and like there's been times where you literally jump in and the hawksbill's right there and you're like, woohoo! So they grab the turtle and here we go up. But then there's times where it kind of takes a while and you might actually not get one, and so you kind of get discouraged. But I noticed that you and our diving becomes a little different. We stay really high off the reef and we like go as fast as we can because we want to cover as much area as possible so we can grab or find a sea turtle. But when you do encounter the sea turtle, for us as researchers, it's really cool that we are able to approach them and we don't have to just grab them right away. We actually stop and we look and see what their behavior is. A lot of times we'll find them grazing, and other times they're just swimming by. It's very rare we see them sleeping, right?
Right, and then because they allow us to come close to them, we can take the camera and kind of go along with them, and they'll go about doing their normal everyday behavior. It's really neat as they, in fact, I was able to study how they go about kind of looking for the food. I mentioned it before, you may have heard that they're kind of picky about the sponges they eat, and we were real curious as to about like how they find those, what really hard to see. We were commenting before, it's like we can't tell like what it is they're eating even when we're really close to them. And so they're very tolerant to us having that camera right near
I mean,
them,
I remember filming a couple for you of their eating behavior, and it's like, it looks like they're eating the rock or like the reef, and you're just like, what the heck? And then he pulls back, he kind of chomps and swims away, and I look down, and it's like this grayish colored spongy material that's in that crack, and that's what he was going after. So
yeah, it's kind of hard to tell.
So weird, because you're like, why are you trying to eat that?
Yeah. Well, I see a question on there. How many eggs do they lay at a time? That's a good question. Especially if you're asking about hawksbills. They are the champs of the reptile world. So they lay more eggs at one time than any other reptile, and that can be up to 200 eggs in a nest.
Wow.
So,
but actually, that's a good question. How many of those actually survive past
oh, well,
the
you know,
nest?
it's a small percentage. You know, that's the same for all the species of sea turtles. But the idea is that they overcome, you know, the odds by reproducing a lot. But no, hawksbills, they pump out a lot of eggs. It's a couple hundred eggs in a given nest. That's the record. It's pretty good. But yeah, you know, if you get 1% to survive to adulthood, that's probably a good number.
Yeah. Another experience that I had with Larry diving, I remember we were watching one, and it was eating, and all the divers got to go around it, and they're just almost like, okay, whatever, there's divers. So it's definitely different. If you've ever dove around a different type of sea turtle, like a loggerhead or a green, the minute they see divers, they're like, ah! Unless the loggerhead's asleep. I've probably swam over the top of sleeping loggerheads and they don't do anything. But most of the time, you're not going to get that interaction. So it's kind of interesting the way that hawksbills interact. I actually had this one time, I don't know if you were on the dive with me, but I was filming an octopus on the reef. And my dive buddy is cracking up behind me, and they had a camera as well. They have footage of me filming an octopus, and a hawksbill is literally over the top of my shoulder. Like, it was like, okay, Nicole, get in a little closer, get a little closer, get that shot in that LCD screen. Okay, right there, get the shot. It was so funny. It was comical to watch this sea turtle watching me look at another species. So they are very smart.
Yep, curious, very curious. We have another question from Scott. Hey, Scott, how you doing, bud? What is their favorite type of sponge? Well, I can throw at you some fancy...
I can tell. Scott loves fancy words. He's your buddy Scott from your lab.
Okay,
yeah,
Geodia neptuni. How about that one? And Sphesiospongea vesperium. How's that, Scott? Do I pass the test? So anyway, one of them, the first one I mentioned, is called the chicken liver sponge. That's the common name. And the second one is called the loggerhead sponge. Believe it or not, even though loggerheads don't eat them that much, they do call them loggerhead sponge anyway. So those are two species that we know that they kind of prefer. They will also take some of those red types of sponges, and they'll also eat corallimorphs, which is kind of a spongy, corally kind of fellow down there. And on occasion, I've heard, though I haven't seen, that they'll take some invertebrates like bristleworms and things. I've heard of that, but I've never personally seen that. But
when they're babies, what are they eating? Are they eating the what the loggerheads and the green sea turtles are eating?
Right, yeah, so
the sargassum?
it appears that the little hawksbills are using the same habitats as hatchlings, and that's that sargassum, you know, the annoying seaweed that washes up on the beach. That provides habitat offshore for lots of little things. And sea turtles swim offshore from their nesting beach, and they're little babies, and they swim offshore and they find these patches of seaweed. They find food and shelter in there. And it is believed that the hawksbills are doing much the same as the other species, and that their first couple of years of life sustained floating in the currents. As I mentioned, in our case, these guys are probably in the Gulf of Mexico, but certainly in the Atlantic as well, and in the Pacific for those over there. But the idea is that first stage of life is very likely swimming around at the surface in the what's called epipelagic environment.
You know, going back to them eating sponges, there's actually something cool that you taught me about the sponges that they eat. They have like these little crystal sphericals.
They're called spicules.
Spicules.
Yeah.
And so because of that, they can digest that. If we tried to eat that, it would hurt our digestive system.
Yeah, I
But
remind
for
people
them-
that sponges are pretty bad things to eat. They're so.
You mean I can't go grab my
Yeah,
kitchen
it's so
sponge and
good.
eat that?
Yeah,
Oh
it's so
man, just kidding.
So that's the thing, and so they, different species adapt over their life, natural history, after the long term. So this is an adaptation for the species, and you can imagine that they've reduced the number of competitors they have. There's only a few species of anything that gets to eat sponges, and only even fewer vertebrates, So hawksbills kind of have that unique place in the marine environment where they're heavy consumers of sponges. Yeah, it's otherwise kind of poisonous and made of broken glass, so...
That doesn't sound good. Maybe need some Tums after that. Anybody else have any questions for the Hawksbill Project?
I don't see any other...
You know what, actually, I want to share a memory, another dive that I had with you. We were talking about the turtles with the transmitters, right? I remember, did you talk about Bertha?
Not by name.
Okay, so, but Bertha was this hawksbill turtle that Larry had put the transmitter on, and she lived on the Mitzvah, right? Or the
Amaryllis.
the Amaryllis. And so she would live there at night on the wreck and then go out and forage, come back. And he knew that because when you go up and down and the satellite tag would track her. But I remember countless dives trying to find this turtle so that we could get that tracker back. And
Yep.
nobody seems to know what happened to Bertha. But we had success with catching other turtles. And one in particular, my favorite dive, we were on, I think it was Ron's Rock? Yeah, Ron's Rock. And, we're set out. We're like, okay, we got to get this transmitter back. And we're doing the dive. And we're literally like, okay, we got to go up because we're getting really low on air, really low on bottom time. And I'm like in the distance, like Larry's literally trying to go up. And I'm like in the distance, I see the turtle. And I'm like, rah! I'm like, go, go, go. And I'm like swimming. And I just grab that turtle. And we were so excited to be able to get that transmitter back because those are a few $100s, and that's why.
I'd say $5,000 a
Oh,
piece.
there you go.
Yeah.
So I mean, they're not a very cheap item to stick on a turtle. So if you can get them back, what Larry can do is ship them back out and get them refurbished so he can use them again. And so that's why it's really important to go to our Force-E events where we sponsor donations for the Hawksbill Project. So that's why.
Thank you all very much.
Yeah, that's why
Appreciate
the Bowling for Turtles is a great event to go to because it's not just for fun social, but it's to support the efforts that the project is doing here in Florida. And again, we will get that rescheduled because there's no way nobody wants to not do this event. I think this is like the number one besides the Force-E Christmas party every year. So we will make sure that we'll reschedule. But the other way you can help out is by getting the license plate. Would you want to grab that?
My goodness. Yes.
Yeah. Hold on. If you are at the DMV and you're changing out your license plate on your vehicle, this license plate right here, the money goes towards Save Our Seas Foundation, which gives money towards the Florida Hawksbill Project. So if you're thinking about getting a new license plate, that is the one you want to pick out, all right? Larry, any other ways that people can help with these sea turtles or just turtles in general?
Well, the same story that we've always had, really. We know what their problems are, plastics in the ocean and all that stuff. So anything you can do in your personal lifestyle to help out the overall health of the environment, what can I say? I mean, volunteering is great. There's a number of organizations up and down the coastline here in Florida that always take people to help out with either nesting surveys or whatever it may be. So, educate yourself. Those are the kind of things. Whatever.
And like we said, as divers, you're not allowed to touch, harass, kiss, or ride any sea turtles, right? Or you're going to get fined by FWC. However, you can, observe them and you can take pictures. And if you're close enough to them, you can get those tags and get a nice clear shot of what those letters. There's always 3 letters followed by 3 numbers, and if you can get those for us, that really helps us understand where this population is going and where it's moving and who's still here in this area. So
Hold on.
You're gonna get one, a tag?
I was gonna get a lizard.
Okay. And so like I said, what I tend to do is I get home, I upload my photos, and then I send an email to Larry, or you can actually Facebook message. He's really responsive on Facebook, Larry Wood or the Florida Hawksbill, and you can send that right over to them, and we can let you know where that turtle was tagged and how many times we've seen it since it was tagged. There was actually one time where there was a sea turtle that we brought up, we tagged it, we released it off the boat, and we went back down and there it was again. So they don't go that far, guys. So if you do see one that's untagged, please let us know. We'd like to know where they're living so that we can go out there and evaluate. Who's this?
Next episode, lizards.
So like I said in the beginning of this live video, we're here at Larry's backyard. It's actually pretty cool back here. We've got lizards, we've got tortoises, no sea turtles though, but it's pretty cool. Who's this?
Oh, this is the fat one. This is Gordy.
He's cute, isn't he? All right, guys. Well, does anybody have any more questions for us? All right. Well, guys, thank you so much. My phone, it's been like, this is like the worst way to hold the phone because it keeps slipping. So anyways, guys, we really appreciate you guys signing on live, and we will upload this video so you can watch it again in case you missed any of the information. So please make sure to get onto our live feeds throughout the next couple of weeks so that we can entertain you guys while you're stuck at home. All right, thanks, Larry.
So long, everyone.
Bye.